Welcome to the Smithers Insight podcast, the place for trends, tech, and insights driving the global markets. From sustainable solutions to smart innovations, we unpack it all.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Smithers Insight podcast. In light of the recent joint venture with Rue and the Bank of Canada in a bid to return British passport printing back to the UK, I'm joined with James Wojtyk, previously Team Lead of Research and Development at the Bank of Canada. Hi James.
Hi Eve.
So today we're going to chat about what this means for the high security printers and printing more generally. So I suppose the first question to kick us off, in plain terms, what does this tender mean for the industry? What are both parties looking to gain from it?
Sure. Well, I think even before that question, I think we should probably just step back a bit because, De La Rue really did have some interesting insights and forays into the whole personal ID. They used to make the UK passports before, but, I think it was, when I was just ending my tenure at the Bank of Canada, De La Rue Authentication Solutions, who had provided software, for businesses and governments, and along with different physical security tokens, ID documents, they sold their authentication solutions business to Crane, right? And so they really looked like they were getting out of that business, right? Instead, Crane gets it, and that really expanded their portfolio. So you sort of see that merger and acquisition right away in 2023 or 2024. I think it was finalized last year, finally. And then all of a sudden, we get this new note about, De La Rue and the Canadian banknote company strategically joining forces to come up and, repatriate the tender for UK passports. So that really means a lot for the industry, I think, because, this joint venture, it really does combine De La Rue's manufacturing capabilities and security document heritage, because they used to make the UK passports for Her Majesty's government, with Canadian banknote companies' extensive experience in digital and physical ID solutions, right? So, Canadian Banknote is one of the world's leading passport manufacturers located right here in Ottawa too, right? And they do, make passports for numerous other nations, I think 13 or 14 Commonwealth ones, including Canadian ones and New Zealand, of course, that are rated as some of the most secure. So I really think the tender means a tremendous amount for the industry. And amongst, the strategic partnership, I think the primary goal with both De La Rue and Canadian Banknote to get aligned is that they're going to harness both their cutting edge technology with state-of-the-art features. And I think that's really going to come up with a very interesting UK passport proposal that they'll definitely offer to the His Majesty's government. Secondly, you're going to have repatriation of the UK passport manufacturing. And I think that's something that the UK government probably wants, very strategic and very, very aligned with that. And then third thing, I think, is that this joint venture is it's just the first step for the passports. They're probably going to be looking at maybe other government IDs because that's what Canadian Banknote does. So we'll definitely see, what sort of happens, with regards to, if they do get the tender and where that expands into not only the UK, but also to Europe as well. So it'd be pretty interesting to see.
Absolutely. You mentioned there very briefly sort of state-of-the-art features. What sort of thing do you think that we'll be able to see on the new passports?
Well, I think one of the things I was doing a little bit of research on this and why I think, Thales basically did get the UK passport tender back, I think in 2018, was that was the first time that the polycarbonate data page was actually included in the UK passport. And maybe De La Rue, I don't know, but maybe De La Rue just didn't have that capability and they wanted to, and once again, with those types of security features and regulations being brought down, with, chips, et cetera, I think that's probably why the passport tender went offshore. But it's interesting. I've worked with both De La Rue and Canadian Banknote, and they have very smart people there. They're engaged in a lot of research and development. So when you look at the strategic alignment, inherently what's going to come out of this is, there may be more new security features that they offer, to not only just passports, but the other personal IDs, driver's licenses, even brand protection, tax stamps, banknotes, even, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when you put those two very capable entities together, when they start, working and designing and developing together. Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens, and like I said, the UK, every passport is trying to outdo the latest generation, right? Trying to be the next and the greatest, so they're going to try and probably be better than the Canadian passport or the New Zealand passport. And so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. And also too, they need to stay ahead of the counterfeiters, right? And, and the fraud, and that's inherently the bottom line of why we're always advancing security features. So yeah, who knows? It's going to be really interesting to see what sort of design and development and security features they do put into the UK passport.
We seem to be seeing an increase in M&As in this industry, in this market. How does that complicate supply chains?
Well, it's interesting that, as I said, you had De La Rue selling off some of their assets to Crane, saw Authentics buying up, metamaterials and all these. You've seen a lot of different, merger and acquisition activity, and it complicates supply chains, but in many respects too, it also it presents both opportunities as well, right? So because when you have a merger and acquisition, you look at a type of synergy that's being developed between the two entities, and I think in many respects, you get the best of both worlds, right? You do consolidate, but you also have operational efficiencies. And I think that's something that's even, with the De La Rue and Canadian Banknote merger, it's not really a merger, it's like a strategic partnership, right? You really sort of see that, De La Rue doesn't necessarily have all the passport manufacturing capability, but Canadian Banknote does. And so they're going to basically be working together. But De La Rue is located in the UK. They have a lot of great design and research and development, security feature experience, et cetera. So I think that's very interesting. Secondly, from supply chain perspective, everyone's worried about their supply chains right now around the world, right? And they're really trying to become a lot more domestically oriented, et cetera. So there is a bit of strategic realignment just with regards to the current geopolitical situations. And that's both a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I also think, in and amongst the personal ID and just the security printing market writ large, right? There's always been a huge emphasis on supply chain security. And, while they will be making, if they do get the tender, we're always talking about this, that, they still don't have the tender yet, right? I mean, I think, if I was His Majesty government, I would award it to them, but that's just me. So, but I think that, one of the things is the supply chains for the security printing industry are very well established, and right? I mean, they're very well protected. Even though you're assembling the passport in the UK, you still have the inks to come from SICPA or some other, very well-known and a provider that really does pay a lot of attention to supply chain, vulnerabilities, the logistics of basically getting a shipment from point A to point B. I distinctly remember being at SICPA one time and seeing their literally the equivalent of an operations center where they are monitoring things all over the world to see what might potentially disrupt any shipment that's out there with a SICPA label on it. So, the supply chains and, it is even assembling all the base materials, because they go to a security printer, they're already considered security materials. So they have to be, just properly aligned with, the logistics, and it always has to be very well designed. They can't deviate it's not very easy to deviate, from that type of logistical situation.
Absolutely. And I suppose, does this give us a preview to where the industry is heading more broadly?
Yeah, I definitely. And I think that, one of the things that obviously De La Rue does not have from a capability perspective and Canadian Banknote does. And it's, you really see a shift towards basically a lot more integrated security solutions, right? So we know that the industry is transitioning from traditional security printing to a lot more comprehensive security, the whole physical to digital security transitions, et cetera. And that's really just comes out of the need to make authentication easier, but also to combat, very sophisticated counterfeiting and fraud, right? So that inherently is the bottom line of why you're getting more integrated security solutions that combine both physical and digital security features, right? Secondly, you also see an emphasis with both De La Rue and Canadian Banknote on technological innovation. And I think that's really what's motivating this merger or this sort of strategic partnership. De La Rue doesn't necessarily need to invest in starting from scratch all digital technologies, right? Canadian Banknote already has it. And so they're really just relaying the know-how to De La Rue so that they can then build it accordingly. And the Canadian Banknote company is going to benefit from it. I mean, the contract is, I think, 350 or 380 million pounds, but that's that's a good, that's a lot of quid, right? As they say. So it's something. And the other thing is too, you also see global expansion. So, I don't think the Canadian Banknote is in Europe much or the UK. And so you really see that type of benefit there for, it's just mutually beneficial, right? And so, from technology, global expansion, market diversification as well, De La Rue is getting, they're getting more into other types of personal ID. So maybe you might see them even grow even further into like brand protection or tax stamps. Who knows? I mean, who knows, just to see it. But this is a good, first step in the right direction, I think.
Absolutely. You spoke there briefly about sort of digitalization and how the market is sort of impacted by digital impact. Is this partnership how security printers can diversify in such a changeable landscape?
Well, I definitely think so because, one of the things that you obviously see this accelerated digital transformation. It's not only actually to, combat the sophisticated counterfeiting and fraud, but it's also to really, just meet certain regulatory standards, right? And that's sort of just required, especially with passports nowadays, right? E-passports, you're going to have e-visas, et cetera, a lot of different sort of, traditional standard security printing products are going electronic, right? And, or having, electronics integrated into them. And so, you sort of see that with regards to the digital transformation, and I think the other thing with regards to, just the whole digital aspect of it is that it's really hard to start something from scratch. And so if you already have a company that's been doing it, and doing it very well, like Canadian Banknote is, it's just pretty much a no-brainer for De La Rue to say, hey, come on board and we can both do it together. I think once again, it's a great partnership, and as I said, it's just the beginning of something. They're looking at, basically, amalgamating those two the technologies for passports, but who knows what eventually is going to happen with that strategic partnership in terms of, like I said, more next generation security features, other different types of digital ID, so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the industry. They're definitely always on the forefront of, the industry, Canadian Banknote, and this has just put them another step forward in that direction.
Absolutely. Well, thanks ever so much, James. You're right. It's a really interesting time for the industry to see where this goes and what happens off the back of this strategic partnership. So thank you so much for your time today to chat this through.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
You've been listening to the Smithers Insight podcast. Subscribe, share, and join us next time to unpack more industry developments.